Sure.
All right. Well, this is Croc 36, and this is my channel. And I have with me today Tom Gale, who is the CEO, can we say, of Nightingale?
Owner. There's no CEO when it's such a small company.
The owner of Nightingale Games that partnered, can we say, or collaborated with Larry Harris in producing War Room.
That's right.
So I don't know why I want to ask this question, but it feels like a good public question to ask. Where did you grow up?
Oh, that's fine. It's a good intro question. I was born in Colorado and lived there for about 6 years, and then we moved to Louisiana. So I lived in Baton Rouge and been to college in St. Louis and moved to Massachusetts after college and been here ever since. So
what do you do for sports teams?
Sports? I'm the sort of badminton, ping pong, lifetime sports kind of guy. Archery and backyard stuff, cornhole with my kids.
I love cornhole. Cornhole's awesome.
So, I played ultimate frisbee a lot in college as well. So this kind of hippie sports, I guess, tennis, soccer, a lot of soccer and baseball, But everyone says, "Oh, you're tall, you should play basketball." But no, I'm just, I guess I'm not aggressive enough or something. I don't know.
Right. Speaking of badminton, do you remember a couple Olympics ago where one team, I forget what it was one of the Asian teams. It could have been China, could have been Korea, but it was so obvious that they were losing on purpose. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, look it up and go Asian team losing on purpose at the Olympics. It's crazy. And everyone's booing in the stands, and you're like, what? Anyways, pretty funny.
Huh. Why would they do that?
I have no idea. Really no idea. So what are your professional credentials,
Tom? Well, I started at a game development studio in Western Massachusetts as an artist, working on a title called Majesty, the Fantasy Kingdom Simulator. And we did a couple other things, projects, and then I went on to other studios like Bluefang, and I shifted around so that I wasn't just doing art, I was also doing design as well. And there's different categories of design, like narrative design. And eventually I came back to Western Mass and was freelancing for a while, and joined Hit Point, and then I also was designer and project manager and things like that. So I've been in the video game industry for about 20 years, and then I met with Joe Minton and worked with him on a project of his called Game Table Online, which converted board games to digital versions of board games. And so that even included Axis and Allies 42. And so I did the UI interface for that as a little side gig. I transitioned from video games to board games, and Joe Minton again came up with this opportunity for working with Larry Harris. And eventually that snowballed into me founding a company, the Nightingale Game.
Slow here. Slow down a little bit. Let me get off the internet in case. Me.
So.
What was that last part that you broke up after it co-founded a board game company?
Oh, yeah. He helped me form the LLC, doing the sort of legal stuff, and you have to register with the state of Massachusetts and all this stuff, pay them $520 to form an LLC, and you know, you learn as you go as far as those steps happen. But yeah, it boiled down to an agreement between Larry Harris and myself. So
Yeah, good.
uh,
So
yeah.
who's the one who sort of popped the question? Was it you? Was it him? Was it just we should do this?
Oh, well, Joe sort of had a team together, and he was going to be more involved, and there were other people who were more involved, and they sort of fell by the wayside.
Oh, okay.
And so I was the one who, besides Larry, who had invested the most time and energy doing a lot of the art and playtesting already, and so I didn't want to drop it, and so
Awesome.
I kept running with the torch.
Yeah.
And so this was back in 2016. So yeah.
Have you ever played Axis and Allies?
I did. I played a lot of those big box Milton Bradley games back in high school. We played Samurai Swords, as it was called then, Akusa or something now, and Fortress America and Axis and Allies. I remember those little foam storage containers that I kept sort of toss them and they spill everywhere. Go, so yeah, I have fond memories of playing way back when, but I wouldn't really consider myself an Axis and Allies super fan because I just sort of moved on to all the millions of other games. So I know that some people have stuck with them for life, but yeah, it's been quite a while since I've played it.
So what are some of those other games you like right now?
Well, we have a weekly game night, so people bring in the latest and greatest. So it's kind of a shame because we don't get to play the same game repeatedly a lot. It's more to sort of whatever's hot. So I guess there's always the usual the Gloomhaven. If we've got a gaming group that plays that, but yeah, it's usually whatever's hot that comes out. So I've got a big collection of 200 or 300 board games I'm trying to thin out.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, so some of my most sentimental ones are the ones I played when I was a kid, though. So things like Axis and Allies and those old ones.
Yeah. So what was the most challenging part of War Room and the whole collaboration?
Yeah, I would say it's a long slog to work on a project without any income for 5 years. That takes a lot of. I had to be in a position where I could afford to do that, and live meagerly and scrape by with some other freelance projects at the same time. So the original development was somewhat slow compared to what it could have been. Larry was also 2 hours away, so we had to. He lives in the north of Boston, so we would have to commute back and forth and have meetings over Skype and all that. So I would say it's just the grind of going over the same thing over and over and over and over and over again hundreds of times, and that can get repetitive and daunting. But in the end, it's worth it to push through that. I got used to that in the video game industry, where you would have to redo something hundreds and hundreds of times before it was polished.
Do you any favorites, mechanics, or rules that you can remember you left on the cutting room floor?
It wasn't so much starting with this big thing and whittling it down. It was more like stirring a pot, and the certain things sort of, you pick out certain things, then oh no, let's put that back in. Let's take it out. No, let's put it back in. And so and Larry had this concern, like as soon as you remove one thing, then it affects everything else. And so it's I don't regret anything so far as because it's already such a large and all-encompassing epic game that a lot of these wish list items I think are better suited for an expansion rather than being in the core. So there are lots of fun ideas out there, but I think to start with this core game, it felt pretty solid. So I don't, off the top of my head, have any regrets about leaving stuff behind.
What the round map? Did that come to you guys all at once, or was that?
That was it. The first thing that Larry had that as a keystone, a foundation before anybody else came on board. So that was just like this is what we've got here, round board. I've been wanting to do this for probably two or 3 years before he even started working on War Room. So and he started several years before. So he probably dreamt it up in 2010 or even earlier. I don't know, but he got to making the round prototypes in 2012, and probably around then. I don't know the timeline of his development internally before we became involved in 2015.
The map is spectacular. Really enjoy it.
Yeah, he wanted to make it different from Axis and Allies, but that wasn't the only reasoning. He's been wanting to do it that way for a while. So.
What's your off the top of your head, a couple of favorite mechanics about War Room that really tickle your fancy?
Well, the selling point is the simultaneous hidden movement, but and the dice are pretty unusual, them being 12-sided. I guess the favorite mechanic, I think the morale system is interesting. So I like that ties in to things that it's sort of the opposite of a lot of games where you're building something. Instead, it's the slow, devastating, crushing destruction of everything. That reflects what war is all about. So I like that it ties in to the effects on, it's not a never-ending supply of fun and games.
And how about the community? How's the community responding?
The community is a lot. There was, the foundation of the Axis and Allies fans, but there might also be a lot of people who really don't like Axis and Allies who have come over as well and say. So that's interesting. I like that it's international. So there's a lot of people from Europe and Asia, and originally we weren't even going to have the Kickstarter be available in other countries, but there was such fervent clamor for sales in Europe and beyond that we changed it, and I'm glad that we did. So for the most part, there's always this one or two trolls, but who must have their voice heard, and I suppose that's fair. If they want to complain as loud as they can, then so be it. But for the most part, everyone's been really, really great and supportive, and so no major complaints there.
Any rules that are, right now optional, or that you're thinking might become optional, or that would even move from the optional to the non-optional, mandatory, sort of second edition?
Right. Well, we did release an FAQ, which has highlighted sections in the rules, but mostly those were clarifications and not actual rule changes. I'm pressing Larry for a few changes, very minor changes having to do with the morale board and the stress, the way the stress is managed. But there's the overall balance of the game. There's been polls on, whether it leans Axis or whether it leans Allies, and I remember seeing one post that said they actually prefer it to be unbalanced, and I thought that was interesting. But since there's arguments on both sides as to whether the Axis are stronger or the Allies are stronger, then I guess that's a good sign. I still feel like the Allied forces have an advantage in the global game. Maybe 60-40, but it's tricky when you're trying to balance history with gameplay mechanics. So there's been a lot of, it's abstract, so of course it's not going to be entirely realistic, but I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think there are going to be any major changes or shifts, but there will be little tweaks for streamlining things. I can talk more about that.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Go ahead, talk about the tweaking and streamlining. I was going to, any pop-up add-ons that have popped in your mind that might make the game better, faster?
We are almost sold out, and so we'll be prepping for a second print run with another Kickstarter. And with that, we're hoping to streamline to make the gameplay faster, since that's one of the biggest complaints, is that it takes forever to play. But we don't want to reduce any of the actual gameplay. We just want it to go more streamlined. So some of those things involve changing the way the battle board works, possibly such that you don't have to pick up the units off the world map and move them over to the battle board. And instead you are choosing your stances with a little control board, and then you reflect how many units you have in a different way, rather than actually having to physically move them. And so that's just, since you have a lot of battles over the course of the game, just that small period of time of picking something up and moving it over saves time, and also it helps with clumsy people who are, the pieces were originally meant to fit together like Lego, but the printing didn't allow for perfect snapping. So it's not entirely clumsy people's fault. But yeah, that, and along with reducing some of the morale board. I'm turning my head to look. I have a copy of the game laid out over here, so I'm turning my head to look at it.
Sure.
But changing the way you keep track of stress, for example, but no actual rule changes or very minor rule changes, but rather just the way in which you keep track of them is optimized. And so given that, we will also might offer a different storage box and ways to keep the units. And with all these little tweaks and changes, we hope to reduce the price by 15%. So the Kickstarter would be in the 130 range, 120 range, maybe 125 to 130. I don't know yet. As the second streamlined edition, but we don't want to cheapen the manufacturing of it. We don't, we still want the nice, thick, chunky pieces, and we're not shrinking the map or We're not, the plastic pieces aren't changing at all. So that's the plan for now.
Would you do anything different from the first rollout? For instance, dealing with that foreign country over there, or and not, you already answered price point production.
Anything different with the rollout in terms of what?
Dealing with China, or dealing with
Oh, with China, and no, we're sort of at the mercy of the political situation. If there's some tariff craziness going on after we've already set everything in motion, we're sort of at the mercy of that. And
that was crazy. That right when you were rolling that out, there was a terrible.
yeah, yeah. I had nightmares about rogue waves cracking container ships in two, and it's there were typhoons and things. I was like tracking this stuff as it watching the container ship cross the Pacific, and I'm like, oh God, there's a typhoon. What are they gonna do? But this, they've got that under control. It would be like, it's sort of like fear of flying with planes crashing. It's the safest way to travel. So
Right.
and as far as the tariff stuff, the only thing we can do is really prepare for it, and charge people shipping after. Originally, when we had our Kickstarter, it was just at the cusp of Kickstarter, you had to charge shipping with the Kickstarter rather than charge it separately.
Okay.
And now that's shifted where everyone pretty much charges shipping after the Kickstarter is over, so it's not rolled into the Kickstarter.
Right.
So that would give a little more wiggle room as far as shipping and tariff costs. Yeah.
How about digital versions?
Digital version, it's gone into hyper mode since COVID struck, and so there are two virtual platforms, Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator. Tabletop Simulator is an app on Steam, and you have to buy that app for like $20 or something, and then people volunteer and create mods for that. And Tabletopia is a little bit different, where they only work with, it's a little less indie, so you can get a subscription and play the premium games, and sometimes you can play the games for free as well. And both of these games are virtual, so that it's not like anything is, it's like you have to actually pick up the piece digitally and move it. So it's, unless there's a specially customized automated program that somebody's actually working on for Tabletop Simulator, you still have to do all the calculations yourself, as far as accounting of things. So there's that, and then back in when we grow a larger fan base, and we have more cash to spend, we might fund a project, and it might start small, something as simple as an accounting, a method to keep track of your resource income and your purchases, things like that. Maybe it has other things like background music and fun things like that. So that might be a support app. As far as a full-blown digital game that you purchase for $19.95 on Steam, that would cost a couple $100,000 to develop. And so if it had AI and a solo version, that would be awesome. But that's probably, we're going to need to grow the fan base larger before we can afford to get that in motion. So
you consider something like a Patreon, where you have people that are sort of just,
yeah, that could work for funding the development of a Tabletopia conversion. We might start a Patreon, but that's really that takes a long time to grow, and you often get tittles from it. So, but it is useful as a promotion mechanism, and it helps with a little bit of income. But I've run a Patreon for another game, but it, only needed to raise $1,000. So um, that's sort of the range of Patreon, unless you get hardcore about it. But
How about tournaments? Any thought on tournaments, or perhaps showing up at certain conferences, board game conferences?
yeah, so we've been trying to, during the Kickstarter, we went to a few, World Board Gaming Championships, and we went up to Canada with, and but as far as I had planned to go to Origins this year, but that was canceled. So I went to Essen last year, but that I didn't. But we have had Greg Smorey, who runs the S'more Swamp and does all the Axis and Allies tournaments. He's had a table where people were able to play, run an event where people were able to play. But as far as competitively, I still think we need to grow the fan base from thousands into the 10,000s. So it's an exciting thing, though. I'd be very curious. I think a lot of people are still exploring, discovering strategies, and eventually people have the shorthand name for certain strategies. Oh, you're doing the P1 down and out southwind move. Oh yeah, blah 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 blah. And, so it'll be fun if that comes about, where certain maneuvers gain nicknames, or strategies gain nicknames.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's all still in the future.
But do you consider the rule book to be sacred and unalterable, or more of a living document?
Somewhere in the middle. So obviously it's not unalterable because we've already altered it. So as far as a living document, that implies going a little bit too far on the other end of the spectrum, as far as it being like a wiki where anybody can edit it, and it's sort of like group. No, everything still has to be authorized by Larry Harris, who's the core guy, and so it's, I don't know what the term is as far as living document versus sacred, but there's something in between where it's like regulated, but still the door is not closed to change if there are obvious trends that point in a certain direction, or for example, if the second printing, some of the mechanics have to change, then there might have to be a split rule book. But we're hoping to avoid that, such that they're not so different that it's it really changes anything fundamental about the gameplay.
You mentioned base game, then you mentioned just expansions or mods. I think you used the term, I can't remember. But is there anything on your mind that's right there that you would?
For an expansion? No, not other than micro expansions that some people have tossed about. On Board Game Geek, you can get these like $5 kits where you get some extra tiles, for such and such, and it's like, oh yay, this little micro expansion. As far as a full-blown expansion, we don't have anything lined up yet. So we're busy working on Imperial Borders. So
Great segue.
yeah, that's the first thing that's foremost on our mind, but that doesn't rule out that we will. It's not like we're saying, well, we're never going to have this expansion. It's just that not right now.
Obvious expansions would be different years. This is 1942. Obviously, you've got 1941, 1930.
Yeah, yeah, different years, and but the micro expansions, people have thought about the flying tigers for that sort of thing, and some of the playtesters, these narratives that go along with certain scenarios, like having to do with Burma and
Oh,
things like that. But it's still something that's coming down the road, so it's not in our focus at the moment.
right, right, right. Okay, so let's move on to any games in development. And so Imperial.
Yeah. So Imperial Borders is several years now in development, and we're at the stage where we are. It's actually the longest stage where we're polishing the rules over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So you go a little crazy, but I think it pays off in the long run as far as being confident about the mechanics, and it's also the manner and layout of the rule book is very difficult. Oftentimes it's where you describe certain rules. Is it linear? It's a lot of the rules explanations are circuitous, like it's a catch-22 where you can't explain one thing without explaining another thing, so which do you explain first? So we're facing that issue with cleaning up the rule book as best we can, and nailing down some of the rougher edges of gameplay. But the bulk of it is certainly playable, and the next step will be to really fine tune the miniatures, because right now we're using placeholder. For Imperial Borders, we have plastic miniatures instead of the abstracted rectangles and squares and circles. Instead, they're actual little cavalry guys on horses and cannons and ships. So we have to model all those as well. Yeah.
So, how far do you? I mean, I'm going to ask a question I know you don't have the answer for, but when do you?
Well, we've been sidetracked a little bit by the concept of supporting War Room in a digital aspect on Tabletopia, and also the second printing of War Room. We haven't decided yet whether we're going to have the Kickstarter for second printing of War Room first, or the Imperial Borders Kickstarter first. And we probably will not tie them together. But we had talked about something at the end of this year, but that's going to be pushed to next year, I believe, because of all the craziness that's going on.
Yeah.
And just the games take forever to develop, and we want it to be as polished and reduce the time of actual production. So for War Room, we estimated the Kickstarter ended in December of 2017, and the games didn't ship until more than we estimated a year, so December 2018, but they ended up not shipping until the fall of 2019, so we were about 9 months late. And so cutting that actual time down will be really important for us in this next Kickstarter, so that the backers don't have to wait as long. So the more we have done already, and it's just like, here, buy our great game.
Right.
And rather than having to wait, and then also the description of the game is more accurate, rather than having to say, well, we have to change this, we have to change that, here's why, and people get mad because we changed something. Most of the changes we made for War Room were additions or improvements rather than lateral changes or backwards changes. But still, it's ideal to have everything be done, but that's not entirely practical sometimes. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to. I look forward to when Corona's over and we can do another play test with Imperial Borders. I'm really enjoying our game. On you put it on Twitch, I think.
Yeah, I tried Twitch and YouTube. Both of them had dropped, would drop the stream occasionally. So it's been a bit of a rough-edged experiment as far as that goes with the different cameras and audio, and so it's not as professional as I would like, but I think it's better to just put it out there. And it's raw, but it's real. And
So, just to explain the process to people, if they wanted to play a long distance game, you've got two cameras set up. Is that correct?
I do. I stopped using the overhead one just because I wasn't able to quickly switch between them, and so I was rolling my chair over to switch cameras. I needed like a little thumb remote to be like chick, 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 chick,
Oh,
and switch cameras. That would be kind of cool, but maybe I just thought of that now. But instead I have, it's easier to see the one at the angle anyway because of the stacks.
yeah.
So I just swivel it back and forth between the battle board and the main game board. So you really only need one. It's really a matter of how well your connection is, so that you can keep talking to each other if you want to play remotely. But it's certainly possible. And if theoretically, if you're just playing with your friends, you don't have to put it on Twitch. You could just use Zoom or whatever you want to.
You could use FaceTime, and obviously you can use Zoom. And I don't know about Duo, but I'm assuming technically speaking, I've played some of the portion of this game blind. I haven't logged on to your. Sometimes I've logged on, but there have been days where I haven't logged on, and we just go and sort of do our stuff.
Yeah. Some super fans have created stuff in Google where there's these Google spreadsheets that it's very interesting. He automates some of the battles and is sort of a master who moves all the pieces, and people refer to that. I've had little anecdotes of a lot of people playing remotely with internationally, and it's the sort of game that it reminds me of Blade Runner when Sebastian and Tyrell are playing chess, and they're like, once a day they come back to the chessboard and like, mastermind. I see two geniuses playing each other. So it's fun to think of it in that respect. Two evil masterminds playing a board game over the long term and having a great time.
Well, I would love to get where that Google thing is, because I think I saw it once and I tried to join a group like that, but didn't work out. So if you could post that somewhere again, that would be great.
The Google what?
You said something about Google Docs or Google.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't really totally understand it. It was something that somebody's using for their personal. So I don't know how public. He posted it on Board Game Geek. So if it's anywhere, it's there.
So what is the premier online forum for War Room, or even for potentially for Imperial Borders?
The site Board Game Geek. Yeah, it's where to go if you have a question, because if you just try and ask me directly, other people don't get the benefit of the answer. So it's better to post it in a public forum. And since Larry Harris's site, he chose not to maintain that. It's right now, if you have a question, it's best to go to the Board Game Geek forum, and Kriegund, Kevin Chapman, who helped edited the rule book. He's an excellent rules referee and will be able to, he quickly answers most questions and then comes to us with any that he's not sure about. So yeah.
Well, thank you so
And
much.
besides Imperial Borders and Borum, Larry does have a third game in the works. So there's more coming.
Any hints?
No. I'd have to talk with Larry about how soon, how soon we want to start unveiling that. But
well, is there anything else that comes to your mind, or did I cover it? Or
well, I think you covered it. Though there's we've talked about this a bit before, but the support from people like you and some of the other testers, Joe and Todd, and Eric Stonemark and Big E, and so many people have been really helpful and supportive, and we are very appreciative of that, because it is it's nice to have like a community surrounding a particular game, not just games in general, but so yeah.
it's interesting. My son has been, had online friendships for a long time, and I was always chastising him that, hey, look, you need some real flesh and blood. And then Corona comes along, and we didn't know it, but he was a pathfinder. And so, these people all over the country that, you might not have 10 war room buddies in the Boston area. Maybe you do. Maybe I do. I don't know. But we do around the world have these people that are passionate about these games. And, so
Yeah, I really like the international aspect of the thought of people playing in different countries the same game is pretty neat.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your time this morning.
Yeah, sure. It's almost perfectly an hour, but yeah, it was good chatting with you, and yeah, that was great. I don't want to go on about my self-conscious,
I'll text you later.
Yeah, it was great talking with you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to somehow sign out right now, and I'm going to get really close to the camera because my eyesight is so poor with my eye injury.
Okay.
This is the
well. I will see you tonight on the game, and prepare for my incredible moves. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.